Hi, I'm eMpTyG and welcome to my channel. Today we have another shenanigan-filled pod for a good clean commander, but before we jump into the gameplay, I just wanted to flag, we had originally recorded this game, I think back in like January, December. It was like shortly after Brothers War had launched, and it was before Ken and I had read the Brothers War lore, so we didn't realize that Myrel's preferred pronouns were they, them, and I think there's a couple times in the script that we misgendered them and called them she, her pronouns. So just wanted to flag that in case that bothered anyone. It unfortunately didn't have enough time for us to go back to correct that, but I just wanted to call that out here, that we do acknowledge those preferred pronouns now that we are aware of it, but we weren't aware of it at the time of the script. So anyways, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and check out the gameplay, and we will see you in a second. I am playing Myrel, Shield of Argive. My deck is all about flooding the board with soldier tokens and winning through combat by boosting them with anthem effects or just going wide. And in my starting hand, I have a Necroma's Will, a Plains, Snow-Covered Plains, Elsh, Norn, Grand Cenobite, Reliquary Tower, Lightning Greaves, and a Skull Clamp. Aron is playing Aron, Benalia's Ruin. His deck looks to flood the board with tokens, then sacrifice them to his commander's ability to pump the board and swing out for victory. In his starting hand, he has a Swamp, a Plains, Marsh Flats, Nested Shambler, Arcane Signet, Murder Investigation, and a Necroma's Will. Ken is playing Anhelo, the Painter. This Grixis Spellslinger deck wants to cast big flashy spells, then copy them using his commander's casualty ability. And in his starting hand, he has a Mountain, a Swamp, Izzet Signet, Skyclave Shade, Cyclonic Rift, Expansion and Explosion, and Blood for the Blood God. Zoe is playing Beledros Witherbloom. Their deck aims to overwhelm the table with stinky pest tokens, and then use Beledros' second ability to untap all their lands for maximum mana and maximum value. And in their starting hand, Zoe has 2 forests, Swamp, Pest Invitation, Vildalkin Orrery, Arasta of the Endless Web, and a Reshape the Earth. I start us off by drawing and playing a Plains' land for turn. I then pass to Aron. Aron draws and plays a Marsh Flats. He immediately pays 1 life to crack it now and fetches up a Godless Shrine. He chooses to have it enter the battlefield tapped. Aron then passes to Ken. Ken draws and plays a Swamp as land for turn, then passes to Zoe. Zoe draws and plays a Forest, and then passes it to me. I draw and play a Reliquary Tower. Paying 2, I cast a Lightning Greaves, and then pass the turn to Aron. Aron untaps, draws, and plays a Plains. He then pays 2 to cast an Arcane Signet, then immediately taps the Signet to cast a Nested Shambler, and then passes the turn to Ken. Ken draws and plays a Snow-Covered Mountain. He pays 2 for an Izzet Signet, and then passes the turn to Zoe. Zoe draws and plays a Swamp. They then pay 2 and cast a Cryptolith Rite. This will allow Zoe to tap any of their creatures for mana. Zoe then passes the turn to me. I untap, draw, and play a Snow-Covered Plains. I then pay 3 and cast a Heliod Suncrown and pass the turn. Aron untaps, draws, and plays a Swamp. He then pays 3 to cast his commander, Aron, Benalia's Ruin. Aron moves to combat and sends his 1/1 at Zoe. Unable to block, Zoe takes 1. With no other actions, Aron passes the turn. Ken untaps and draws for turn. He then pays 3 to cast a Valakut Awakening. Valakut allows Ken to put any number of cards in his hand and put them on the bottom of his library, and then draw that many cards plus 1. Ken puts 5 cards from his hand to the bottom of his library and draws 6 cards. He then plays a Snow-Covered Island as land for turn and passes to Zoe. Zoe untaps, draws, and plays a Forest. They then pass the turn to me. I untap and draw, paying 1 to cast a Skull Clamp. I then pass the turn to Aron. Aron untaps and draws. He pays 2 and casts a Bloodghast. He then follows that up by paying 2 to tap his commander to sacrifice the Bloodghast, putting a +1/+1 counter on each of his creatures. Aron then plays a tapped Emeria the Sky Ruin as his land for turn. This triggers his Bloodghast landfall ability, putting it back onto the battlefield. Aron moves to combat and swings his 2/2 Shambler at me. Unable to block, I take 2 damage. On Aron's end step, Ken casts an Opt, scrying 1 to the bottom, and then draws a card. The turn then passes to Ken. Ken untaps, draws, and plays an island. He then pays 3 to cast his commander, Anhelo the Painter. Ken then passes the turn to Zoe. Zoe draws and plays a swamp. They pay 4 to cast an Arasta of the Endless Web and passes the turn to me. I untap, draw, and play an Emeria Shattered Skyclave, paying 3 to shock it in, and then I pay 4 for my commander, Myrel, Shield of Argive. With Myrel on the battlefield, my opponents can no longer cast spells or activate abilities on my turn. I then move my Greaves to Myrel, giving her Haste and Shroud. Moving to combat, I swing Myrel at Aron. On attack, Myrel triggers, and I create a single 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token for each soldier I control. Since I only have Myrel, I make 1/1 soldier artifact creature token. Since Aron's Bloodghast cannot block creatures, Aron takes 3 commander damage. Feeling good about my board state, I pass the turn to Aron. Aron untaps and draws for turn. He pays 3 and casts a Promise of Boonry. Aron moves to combat and swings his Nested Shambler and Bloodghast at me. I choose not to block and take 4 damage. During his second main phase, Aron pays 2 to activate his commander, sacrificing the Bloodghast. When the Bloodghast dies, Aron's Promise of Boonry triggers and Aron sacrifices it, creating 4 1/1 colorless spirit tokens. Aron's commander finishes, resolving its ability, and he puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature he controls. He then passes the turn. Ken untaps, draws, and plays a swamp, paying 1 for Occult Conscript. It enters the battlefield tapped. Deciding to leave mana up like a sus blue player, Ken passes the turn. Zoe untaps, draws, and plays a swamp. They then pay 3 for a Grist the Hunger Tide. Grist enters the battlefield with 3 loyalty counters. Zoe then pluses 1 Grist's loyalty counter, creating a 1/1 black and green insect creature token and mills a wild growth into their graveyard. They then pass the turn to me. I untap and draw my card for turn, and I pay 1 to equip my Skull Clamp onto my soldier. My soldier dies, so I draw 2 cards from Skull Clamp's trigger. Playing a Plains, I then pay 4 for a Leonin War Leader. I move my Greaves onto the War Leader, giving it Haste and Shroud. Moving to combat, I swing Myrel at Zoe and my War Leader at Ken. On attack, Myrel triggers, creating 2 soldier tokens. War Leader also triggers and creates 2 1/1 cat creature tokens with lifelink that are also tapped and attacking Aron. Moving to blocks, Aron blocks the 2 cats with 2 of his spirits, and Zoe blocks Myrel with their Arasta. My 2 cats die, Ken takes 4, and Myrel and Arasta bounce off of each other. Since my 2 cats had lifelink, Heliod triggers, and I put a +1/+1 counter on Myrel and the other +1/+1 counter on one of my soldiers. I then pass the turn to Aron. Aron untaps and draws for turn. He pays 2 for a Murder Investigation, choosing to have it enchant his Nested Shambler. Moving to combat, Aron swings the Nested Shambler at Ken and his 4 2/2 spirits at Zoe's Grist. In response to attackers being declared, Ken pays 5 for a Fact or Fiction. Arasta triggers, making Zoe a 1/2 green spider token with reach. Ken then sacrifices his Cult Conscripts to copy the spell, thanks to Anhelo giving all of Ken's instants and sorceries casualty 2. Resolving the first Fact or Fiction, Ken reveals a Seize the Spotlight, Storm Carved Coast, Metallurgic Summoning, Rise of the Dreadmarn, and a Training Center. Ken chooses to have Zoe put the cards into 2 piles. Zoe puts the Seize, Rise of the Dreadmarn, and Training Center into a pile, and the Summonings and Storm Carved Coast into another pile. Ken takes the first pile, and the second pile goes into his graveyard. Resolving the second copy of Fact or Fiction, Ken reveals a Mountain, Deadly Rollick, Storm Killin' Artist, Command Tower, and a Ghoulish Procession. This time, Ken chooses me to separate the cards into 2 piles. I put the Deadly Rollick into 1 pile and the rest into another pile. Ken chooses the Rollick and puts the rest of the cards into his graveyard. Still in Aron's declared attacker step, Ken casts the Deadly Rollick, exiling Aron's Shambler. In response, Zoe pays 3 and casts a Crossing Grip, targeting the Murder Investigation. Crossing Grip resolves, destroying the Murder Investigation. With Deadly Rollick still on the stack, Aron pays 2 and sacrifices his Nested Shambler to his commander's ability. When Nested Shambler dies, Aron creates 3 tapped 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens and then puts a +1/+1 counter on all his creatures. Without a legal target for Ken's Deadly Relic, it fizzles out. Zoe, unable to block all of Aron's now 3/3 spirits, has no way to protect Gris and goes to 0 loyalty counters. Sad. Aron then passes the turn. Ken untaps, draws, and plays a training center as land for turn. He then pays 3 and casts a Morbid Opportunist. He follows it up by paying 2 and casts a Sky Clade Shade. Ken then passes to Zoe. Zoe untaps and draws for turn. They then pay 7 and cast their commander Beledros Witherbloom, which allows them to make a pest token on each player's upkeep. Zoe then uses Beledros' ability to pay 10 life and untap all of their lands. They then pay 4 for a Vildelkin Orrery, letting Zoe cast spells at instant speed. Zoe then passes the turn to me. I untap and draw for turn. On my upkeep, Zoe creates a 1/1 pest token. I then pay 2 to cast a Knight of the White Orchid. When it ETBs, I search my library for a plains and put it onto the battlefield. I then pay 4 and cast an Anointed Procession. This will let me create twice as many tokens. Moving to combat, I swing my War Leader at Aron and Myrel at Ken. On attack, Myrel triggers, giving me 8 1/1 soldiers. My Leonin War Leader also triggers, and I create 4 1/1 cats with lifelink, tap, and attacking Zoe. Moving to blocks, Aron declares no blockers. Ken blocks with his commander, and Zoe blocks 2 of the cats with their Arasta and Beledros. Aron takes 4 damage, Myrel and Anhelo both die, and Zoe kills 2 cats and takes 2 damage. Ken's Morbid Opportunist triggers, and Ken draws a card. Since I gain 4 life in 4 different instances, Heliod triggers 4 times, and I put 2 +1/+1 counters on my Knight of the White Orchid and 2 counters on my soldier. During my second main phase, I move my Lightning Greaves onto Heliod, hoping to keep it protected since it's now a creature, and pass the turn to Aron. Aron untaps and draws for turn, and Zoe creates another pest token thanks to their commander. Aron pays 4 and casts an Alinda the Dusk Rose. Wanting to hold up blockers, Aron decides to just pass the turn to Ken. Ken untaps and draws for turn. Zoe also makes another pest creature token. Ken then plays a swamp and foretells a card for 2 mana. He then pays 5 and casts a Wandering Archaic. This allows Ken to copy his opponent's instant and sorcery spells if they don't pay an additional 2 mana. Deciding not to attack, Ken passes the turn to Zoe. Zoe untaps, creates another pest token, and draws. Paying 9 mana, Zoe casts a Reshape the Earth. They pay an additional 2 mana to prevent Ken's Archaic from copying the spell. Reshape then resolves, and Zoe fetches up 10 land cards and puts them onto the battlefield, which includes an Ancient Tomb. Using Beledros' ability, Zoe pays 10 life and untaps all their lands. Paying 3, Zoe then casts a Pact of the Serpent, paying the 2 additional mana for Archaic's trigger. Zoe then chooses pests and draws cards and loses life equal to the number of pests they control, which is 4. Paying 4 more mana, Zoe then casts a Parallel Lives, letting them create twice the number of tokens if 1 or more tokens would be created. Wrapping up their turn, Zoe then plays a forest as land for turn and passes to me. I untap and Zoe creates 2 pest tokens on my upkeep, and then I draw for turn. Playing a snow-covered plains, I follow that up by paying 7 mana to cast an Elesh Norn Grand Cenobite. Norn resolves, and all of my opponent's creatures get -2/-2, and my creatures get +2/+2. All of Aron's squirrels, Ken's Skyclave, Zoe's pests, and spiders die. Ken's Morbid Opportunist triggers, and he draws a card. Zoe also gains 6 life from their pests dying. I then slide my Greaves onto my Elesh Norn. With my devotion being 5 or greater, Heliod is still a creature that I can attack with. Moving to combat, I send my Heliod, Knight of the White Orchid, and 2 cat tokens at Aron. And I send my Leonin War Leader along with my beefed up soldier token at Ken and my 9 3/3 soldier tokens at Zoe. On combat, my War Leader creates 4 more cat tokens attacking Ken. Moving to blocks, Aron blocks Heliod and the Knight of the White Orchid with his 2 spirits. Ken blocks the soldier with his Archaic, and Zoe declares no blocks. Before combat damage is dealt, Zoe taps their lands for 8 mana, and then uses Beledros' ability to untap all their lands, leaving Zoe at 7 life. They then tap out for an additional 17 floating mana, totaling at 24 mana. Zoe then casts a Pest Infestation, where X equals 11, leaving 2 mana to pay for the Archaic trigger. Pest Infestation lets Zoe destroy up to 11 artifacts or enchantments and create twice the pest tokens that X is equal to. Zoe chooses to destroy my Anointed Procession, Lightning Greaves, and the 9 artifact soldier tokens attacking them. Then, thanks to the parallel lives, Zoe creates 44 pest tokens instead of 22. Since Elshenorn is still on the battlefield, those tokens immediately die, and Zoe gains 44 life. With no other responses, combat damage is dealt, and Aron takes 6 damage, and Ken takes 18. My lifelink kitties gain me a total of 18 life, and Heliod triggers, letting me to distribute 6 +1/+1 counters onto my creatures. I put 2 on my War Leader, 2 on my Knight, and the remaining 2 on Heliod. I then pass the turn to Aron. Aron untaps, draws, and Zoe makes 2 pest tokens which die immediately. Aron then pays 3 for Elaziel Valakith's Champion. He then pays 2 and uses his commander's ability to sacrifice his spirit and puts a +1/+1 counter on each of his creatures. Ken's Opportunist triggers, drawing him a card. Laziel's ability triggers, and Aron adds an additional counter on each creature he controls. Aron then passes the turn to Ken. Ken untaps and draws for turn. Zoe creates 2 more pest tokens that die on ETB. He pays 5 and casts a Pull from Tomorrow, drawing 3 cards and discards 1. On cast, Zoe creates 2 spiders that die immediately because of Elshenorn. Ken then passes the turn and has to discard down to hand size. He discards as Seize the Spotlight. Zoe untaps, draws, and creates 2 pests that die immediately and gain 2 more life. Ken, remembering he missed his Morbid Opportunity trigger from the last turn, draws a card since it is not a May ability. He then discards another card down to hand size, discarding a Bloodghast. Now Ken draws for the current Morbid Opportunist trigger. Zoe pays 4 mana, casting a Rampant Growth and a Nature's Lore. They fetch up a basic forest onto the battlefield with Nature's Lore and a tapped basic forest with the Rampant Growth. Unable to do anything else, Zoe passes the turn to me. I untap, draw for turn, then Zoe makes 2 more pest tokens that again die immediately, gaining them 2 more life. Ken draws another card from Morbid's trigger. I then play Castle Ardenvale as my land for turn. Paying 6, I recast my commander, Myrel. In response, Zoe casts a Golgari Charm, choosing to give all creatures -1/-1 until end of turn, killing Ken's Morbid Opportunist. I then pay 1 and cast a Path of Exile, targeting Zoe's Beledros. They have no response, and Beledros goes back to the command zone. As part of the path's cost, Zoe fetches up a basic land and puts it onto the battlefield. They find a forest and put onto the battlefield tapped. Moving to combat, I swing all my creatures aside from Myrel and Elshenorn at Zoe. On attack, Leonin War Leader makes me 2 more cats tapped and attacking Zoe. Unable to block, Zoe takes 43 damage, leaving them at 14 life. Since I attacked with 8 lifelink kitties, I distribute 8 +1/+1 counters among my creatures. I put 2 counters on Leonin, 2 counters on Heliod, and the remaining 4 on Myrel. I then pass the turn to Aron. Aron untaps and draws for turn. He plays a swamp, triggering his Bloodghast in his graveyard. Bloodghast is returned to the battlefield and dies immediately. Hoping to lower my defenses a bit, Aron casts an Akroma's Will, giving his creatures Flying, Vigilance, Double Strike, Lifelink, Indestructible, and Protection from all colors. In response, I pay 1 to cast Swords to Plowshare, targeting Aron's commander. Aron's commander goes to the command zone, and Aron gains 6 life. Since Aron's remaining creatures have protection from white, I am unable to block and take 14 damage. Aron then gains 14 life. During his second main phase, Aron casts a Lightning Greaves and then passes the turn. Ken untaps and draws. He plays a Shipwreck Marsh as land for turn, triggering his Bloodghast, and it dies on entry. Ken pays 8 for an overloaded Mizzix Mastery, letting him cast each instant and sorcery card in his graveyard. Since Pull from Tomorrow is an X spell, Ken is unable to cast it with Mizzix Mastery. Ken starts by resolving the Opt, scrying 1 to the bottom and drawing a card. Next, he resolves the Valakut's Awakening, choosing to put 9 cards from his hand onto the bottom of his library, drawing 10 cards. Before resolving any more cards, Zoe offers a deal to Ken that if he casts the Deadly Relic next, Zoe will let Ken keep all 5 cards from the Fact or Fiction. Taking the deal, Ken casts the Deadly Relic targeting my Elshnorn and exiles it. Next, Ken resolves the Fact or Fiction, revealing 4 lands and a double vision. Zoe keeps their end of the deal and lets Ken keep all 5 cards. Since the Elshnorn is off the battlefield, Zoe is once again able to create spiders with Arasta. Lastly, Ken casts the Seize the Spotlight, having each opponent choose Fame or Fortune. Each opponent chooses Fortune, meaning Ken draws 3 cards and creates 3 treasure tokens. Because the cast trigger, Zoe makes 2 more spiders. Still fishing for an answer, Ken pays 3 to cast a Decoy Gambit. Each opponent chooses between letting Ken draw a card or having Ken return a creature they control to their hand. Each opponent chooses to have Ken draw, so Ken draws 3 more cards. Unable to find an answer to my board state, Ken passes the turn to Zoe, discarding down to hand size. Zoe untaps, draws, and plays a swamp. They then pay 9 mana to recast their commander, Beledros. Zoe then passes the turn to me. I untap, draw, and Zoe creates 2 pest tokens. I play an Aganjo's Castle as my land for turn, and then I pay 4 for an Akroma's Will of my own. With no responses, Akroma's Will resolves, and I swing out my entire army for enough lethal to knock everyone out. GG, y'all! Alright, I hope you had fun watching those shenanigans. I know I had a lot of fun that game, and kind of only confirmed how much I absolutely love Myrel and how they're one of my favorite commanders, still to this day. So, I think as far as like MVP cards go, there's 2 plays that really stood out to me. One was Zoe being able to flash out the Pest Infestation, and because I had Elshnorn out, they made like 40 pest tokens, gained like 40 life, and blew up like my protection pieces and some other things that were really important for my board state. So that was a super cool play to see. And then the other thing that really stood out, I think, was just being able to have Elshnorn on the battlefield for long periods of time just really added so much value and extra damage to my board state, but then also made it difficult for my opponents to generate like chump blockers or kind of get some utility pieces that they were hoping to generate by having, you know, sack fodder or other pieces for the board. So overall, I think the 2 top cards that super stood out to me were Pest Infestation and Elshnorn. And the other thing as well that was super cool was just Ken's ability to like dig through his deck for trying to find answers to essentially blow up Elshnorn or get a board wipe going. But yeah, overall, really fun game, a lot of interaction going on, and I hope to see you in the next one. Drop a comment below if you want me to keep doing voiceover videos, or if you prefer kind of the in-person like banter webcams that we have. We're still trying to figure out like what type of commander content we want to make, so it's really helpful if you all leave feedback. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, have a good one, and bye.